My name is Serenity Moore. I'm 32 years old, living and working in Denver. I never asked for favoritism. Growing up, I always believed that if I worked hard enough, people would eventually notice, that they would eventually love me. But that graduation ceremony shattered the last illusion I was holding on to. My name was announced as valedictorian. The entire auditorium stood and applauded. I walked slowly toward the stage, clutching the speech I had practiced night after night. I had pictured so many times my parents sitting in the front row, eyes brimming with pride. But when I looked down at the seats reserved for the valedictorian's family, 3 chairs sat empty. At that exact moment, a guest in the audience raised their phone, and on the big screen, a live stream from Las Vegas appeared. My father Charles was clinking glasses with my mother Linda and my brother Ethan. They were laughing in a dazzling banquet hall, champagne spilling over their glasses with text across the screen. "Congratulations, Ethan, on launching your own company." The entire auditorium stirred in shock. I stood frozen at the microphone, the heavy speech in my hands, my chest hollow as if I had just fallen into an abyss. Have you ever been abandoned at the exact moment you needed most to be seen? Have you ever thought that if you stayed quiet long enough, love would finally come? If you've felt that way, leave a comment below. I read every word. Hit like, subscribe to the channel if you believe truth deserves to be spoken out loud. Because after that moment, I decided to tell everything. And my story was only just beginning. I stood there, the stage lights pouring across my face, but inside, all I felt was darkness. People around me kept clapping. They didn't know what I was seeing on that screen. They didn't see the 3 empty chairs. They couldn't feel how that moment ripped open an old wound I had hidden for years. I thought I had gotten used to it. But when expectations are the last thing you cling to, absence can cut like the very first knife. Because I had been enduring that absence for a long time already. I remember being 8 years old, entering my first citywide math competition. My teacher said a parent had to come along to sign the consent form. I printed it myself, packed it in my bag the night before, and reminded my mom 3 times. But that morning, when I put on my uniform and walked to the door, she just shook her head. "Your dad's busy driving Ethan to his basketball game. I'll ask the neighbor to take you." So I sat on the back seat of Mrs. Taylor's car, my mom's friend, hugging my exam papers tight, my throat tightening when I saw the other kids with their parents by their side, cheering, taking photos, patting shoulders with pride. I sat still, stared at my name tag, memorized practice questions, and told myself, "It's fine. As long as I do well, it will be enough." I won second place in the city. When I came home, my mom didn't ask how it went. She was too busy telling the story of Ethan scoring in the final seconds. My dad replayed the video of the game, over and over, at the moment Ethan's teammates lifted him into the air. I left my certificate on the kitchen counter, tucked between an electric bill and the diet menu my mom had been writing. That night, while tidying up the kitchen, she swept everything into a paper bag and shoved it into the cabinet under the sink. I found my certificate 2 weeks later, the corner stained with grease. At 11, I was chosen to give the end-of-year speech. I practiced pronunciation with the principal for a whole month. I chose a speech about gratitude, about silent teachers, about parents watching their children's every step. The day of the ceremony, I looked out across the hall. I saw the principal, classmates, even the pizza delivery guy I had met 3 days earlier, but no seat for my family. I delivered the whole speech, voice steady, not a word wrong. After the ceremony, when everyone was taking photos with their families, I stood alone by the trees on the school lawn, using my phone's timer to take a single picture as a keepsake. That night, I told my parents about it. My mom asked, "Was Ethan's name in the program?" When I said, "No, it was my ceremony," she glanced at my dad and sighed. "Well, his team had a surprise meeting today. The boys really needed support." Somehow, Ethan's right now always overlapped with my milestones. I began to shrink into myself. Little by little, I stopped telling them. I stopped saying what competitions I entered, what awards I won, where I spoke. I still did them. I still worked. But in silence. At 15, I applied for a science summer camp scholarship in another state. I printed the forms, requested recommendation letters, confirmed housing, even wrote a hand-signed letter to the principal asking permission to stay 2 extra days for the finals. My dad called it a waste of time. He said, "Ethan has his regional finals coming up. The whole family will be in Arizona to cheer him on." I answered, "I have to go to North Carolina. I can handle it." My mom stayed silent. My dad didn't even look up. I took a bus across states for 31 hours. In my bag were a folded map the size of a placemat, 3 packs of granola bars, and a bottle of water. I won first place nationally. A local paper ran a small piece with a photo of me on the podium. I mailed it home. My parents never replied. But 2 weeks later, I saw them post a picture of Ethan on Facebook with the caption, "Proud of our son, the heir to the future." And me? I was just a shadow. A daughter living in the house but invisible to her own family. Have you ever felt like that? Clearly existing, doing everything right, yet always standing behind someone deemed more important? I thought patience was the answer, that if I became exceptional enough, eventually they would see me. But the truth was, the farther I went, the more I was left behind. They didn't forget. They just chose not to remember. And when I stood at graduation, lights shining, my name echoing through the auditorium, while my parents were raising glasses somewhere else, I finally understood I had never been their choice. I had just pretended too long, convincing myself I belonged. I was accepted into the University of Boulder with a partial scholarship, thanks to my essay on educational inequality in rural areas. The day I got the letter, I held the envelope to my chest, standing in our familiar kitchen, waiting for my mom to look up from her phone. She glanced over and said briefly, "Oh, congratulations. But don't push yourself too hard." Ethan finished his first year and dropped out to focus on his app. People change directions. I didn't change directions. I packed my youth into a careful plan. I covered the rest of my tuition, working shifts at the campus library, and on weekends, I took shifts at a cafe near the dorms. Morning shifts started at 6 a.m. I worked behind the espresso machine until noon, then rushed to afternoon classes. At night, I headed back to the library, working while reading under dim yellow lamps on the second floor. Meanwhile, Ethan was enrolled at a private East Coast university, majoring in economics, though his grades had never been above average. "Family investments are worthwhile," my mom said. They rented him his own apartment, sent a monthly allowance, even bought him a car. After 3 semesters, Ethan dropped out. He called home, voice cheerful. "I found partners. I want to focus on building a software project." I was at the library circulation desk when I overheard my mom on the phone. "That's wonderful. Finally, someone with vision, just like your father used to be." She didn't ask how I was doing. Ethan moved back to Colorado. Within 6 months, his first project consumed $12,000 from our parents, a meal tracking app that crashed after 3 minutes on Android. I kept washing cups, wiping tables, copying notes late at night. Hannah was the only one who noticed the difference. We met in a media theory class. She was the kind of person who never sat still in the face of unfairness. Once, a male student interrupted my presentation mid-sentence, and Hannah slammed her textbook on his desk before telling the professor, "If you don't stop him, I will." Hannah didn't pry, but I could feel the way she quietly observed. One evening, I sat curled up in the dorm hallway, too tired to turn on the light. She set a sandwich box beside me, said nothing, then after a while whispered, "Serenity, Do you ever feel like you're fighting for a place in your own home? I didn't answer, but my throat burned. In my second year, I was chosen as a research assistant for Professor Caldwell, considered a living icon in our department. He saw something in me my family never did. You have a sharp, decisive voice, enough to make this a career, he told me. After reading a paper I had turned in late because of work shifts. When I said I couldn't take an internship because I had to work to cover rent, he nodded, then wrote me a recommendation letter and arranged a special financial grant from the department. I used that money to pause my jobs and spend 2 months fully immersed in my internship at the student newspaper. During that time, I wrote my first published article, The Shadow Beside the Empty Chairs. It was about students whose families never showed up, students who went to competitions, meetings, graduations alone. Ethan read it. He texted me, "It's well written, but sounds gloomy. Family is support, not something to prove." I replied, "Maybe for you." He didn't understand. Maybe he never would. Because Ethan always had someone to catch him when he fell, I didn't. If I fell, I had to crawl back up myself and clean the floor afterward. By my third year, I was nominated to attend the National Student Journalism Conference. I had to cover my own flights, hotel, meals. I drafted a budget and emailed my mom, asking if the family could help with even a small portion. She replied with 3 lines, "Ethan needs more capital for his second investment. We can only focus on one thing at a time. Hope you understand." I deleted the message, set my phone face down, and went back to work my evening shift. That night, Hannah drove me home. I nearly fell asleep in her car. When we reached the dorm, she held my hand for a second. "You don't need to prove anything to them. You're already going farther than anyone." I laughed, but my throat tightened. And then, in my final year, I was chosen as valedictorian. The graduation ceremony would be held in May. Each valedictorian was allowed to invite 3 family members into the reserved front row seats directly in front of the stage. I handwrote the invitations, slipped them into cream envelopes, and mailed them home. 3 weeks passed. No reply. I texted Ethan. He answered curtly, "Mom says she's checking the schedule." I didn't text again. Instead, I gave those 3 invitations to Professor Caldwell, to Ted and his wife, the neighbors who once drove me to a citywide academic competition in 8th grade, and to Hannah. I still saved those 3 front row seats for them. Because if I could one day stand tall on that stage, it was thanks to the people who walked beside me quietly, not the ones who only showed up when there were results to celebrate. 3 days before graduation, my phone buzzed as I sat revising the final print of my speech. On the screen appeared my father's name. Not Ethan, not my mother. My father, the one who usually only called when it had to do with documents or taxes. I lifted the phone to my ear. Before I could say a word, he spoke immediately, voice startlingly calm. "Serenity, your mom and I talked it over. We've been pretty tired lately. Ethan's been running some new campaigns, and the whole family's been busy. Flying to Denver right now is hard to schedule. But don't worry, we'll watch the live stream. Send me the link, okay?" I held the phone in silence for a few seconds. On the other end, he cleared his throat, then added, "We're really proud of you. You've always been so accomplished." Proud? The word rang hollow, like the empty chair outside my room. I couldn't form an answer. In my head, I repeated, "Who is he talking about? Me, the one they hadn't shown up for at a single ceremony in 4 years." "I understand." The reply slipped out like a reflex, without thought, as if I'd been rehearsing it for years, a survival instinct. "Right, that's our Serenity, always so understanding," my father said, sounding relieved. Then he hurried a goodbye and hung up. I sat there, fingers gripping the pen, eyes fixed on the unfinished speech before me. In the final lines I had written, "No one makes this journey alone. Whether family, friends, or strangers who reached out when I needed it, I offer my deepest gratitude." I wondered, was I lying? That night, I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I unlocked my phone, scrolling through old social media posts, searching for something familiar like a comfort ritual, and then I saw it. My mother's newest post, uploaded at 8:17 p.m. that same evening while I was sitting in my dorm, fixing punctuation in my speech. The first image, a lavish banquet hall in Las Vegas, crystal chandeliers glinting off champagne glasses. The caption read, "Congratulations to Ethan on launching his new company. So proud of my son." I swiped to the second picture. My entire family, my mother, my father, and Ethan sat around a long table draped in white cloth. Ethan in a suit, raising a glass, smiling brightly. My father next to him, arm around his left shoulder, face beaming with satisfaction. The last was a short video. Ethan stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by applause, flowers in his hands, a banner above reading, "Ethan Incorporated Launch Party." My mother laughed into the camera, filming from start to finish. I turned off my phone. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't throw anything. I just sat there in silence, as if I had received a verdict I'd been waiting on for years. It wasn't exhaustion. It wasn't busyness. They chose not to come. They chose Ethan. The 3 VIP tickets I had sent home, where had they ended up? Shoved in a kitchen drawer, like the math certificate I won at 8, stained with grease. I stepped off my bed, barefoot in the dark dorm hallway. Hannah spotted me from her door across the hall, knocking softly when she saw me standing by the hot water dispenser. "Serenity?" I didn't turn. I rested my hand on the machine, listening to the boil rumble like it was burning beneath my ribs. "They're not coming." My voice was low, hoarse. "Not because they're tired, because they're at a party in Vegas, celebrating Ethan." Hannah didn't ask anything. She simply came to stand beside me, one hand steady on my shoulder, solid as a pillar in the cold night. "Want to go outside?" she asked. I nodded. We walked through the empty street behind the library. There was an old bench under a tree where I used to sit and read in freshman year. When we sat, I handed her my phone. "Look!" She scrolled through each photo, watched the video. She said nothing until the screen went dark. She kept holding it, staring into her palm. "Serenity, I wish I had words to make this hurt less," she said, eyes still on the darkness ahead. "But maybe what you need right now is a different truth." I turned to her. "You were never chosen, but not because you weren't worthy. It's because you weren't someone they could control. They never saw you, because they never tried to understand who you are." I didn't answer, but the words struck something deep inside me. Hannah pulled a folded slip of paper from her pocket. "I wrote this yesterday. Didn't plan to give it to you so soon, but maybe this is the right time." I opened it. A simple handwritten note, heavy with meaning. "Remember, presence doesn't make kinship. Kinship comes from the choice to stay, even when nothing binds you." I folded it carefully, as if it were the most valuable paper I'd ever hold. We sat there in silence, under a piece of sky no one noticed. No stage lights, no applause. But I didn't feel alone. Later, I sat at my desk, yellow lamplight spilling over 2 sheets of paper laid side by side. One was neatly typed, polished, perfectly structured. "Thank the faculty, honor the parents, call for future dreams." The other was handwritten in restless scrawl stained with coffee, crossed out and rewritten. But in it, there was truth. It was me. The clean draft was what people expected me to say. The handwritten one was what I'd never dared to speak out loud to anyone, not even to myself. I sat a long time. Every time my eyes slid to the honest draft, a sharp guilt twisted in my chest. I wasn't afraid of their anger. What scared me was the moment after. The moment when even the last illusion was gone. The door creaked open. Daniel stepped in with a paper cup, peppermint tea drifting through the air. "How long have you been up?" he asked, setting it down, his eyes on the two speeches. "Since my dad called." My fingers clenched the paper edge. He pulled a chair beside me, waiting. He knew not to push, but when I sat too long in silence, he rested a hand lightly on my wrist. "Which one are you going to read?" I looked up, lips so dry I pressed them together to keep from cracking. "I'm not sure. One will earn applause. The other will earn resentment." Daniel tilted his head, his gaze calm. "Which one are you more afraid of?" I looked at the handwritten draft. In it, I had written about standing alone at an airport with my luggage while friends left with their parents. About my mother canceling plans to attend my scholarship ceremony because Ethan had a mild cold. About 12 birthdays I celebrated alone, paid for with cafe tips. "I don't know if anyone wants to hear that truth." Daniel smiled faintly. "If they don't want to hear it, what do you think they're applauding for? A polished, empty speech?" I stayed quiet. Serenity. His hand tightened on mine, eyes steady as if weighing every word. "You have the right to speak. You lived it. No one else can tell this story. If you don't say it, who will?" I leaned back, exhaling. "I'm scared they'll cut me off completely. The real question is, do you have anything left to lose?" The words sliced through the veil I had been holding between myself and reality. For years, I had lived hoping they'd notice me. Every time they didn't, I shrank back, swallowed silence, prayed the next time would be different. But year after year, I remained the shadow behind Ethan's photos. I closed my eyes. An image came to me, 16 years old, standing outside my parents' room, holding an invitation to the state honors banquet. I thought of knocking. I didn't. I slipped it under the door instead, too afraid of hearing rejection out loud. "I'm tired of silence," I whispered, not looking at Daniel. "Then let them hear you this time. Just once." His grip steadied me. I nodded, my eyes fixed again on the handwritten speech. The uneven letters, the cross-outs, the rawness. It was alive. It trembled. But it was mine. I stood, went to the drawer. Inside was a box of things I had never had the courage to throw away. Letters my mother wrote Ethan, family photos without me, online posts of public congratulations where my name never appeared. I placed them on the desk beside the speeches. Then I took a red pen, slashed through the printed speech, folded it neatly, shoved it into the drawer. I turned to Daniel. "What if they call me selfish?" He shrugged. "Maybe they should ask themselves why you had to scream before anyone listened." I smiled, not from relief, but from a decision. The fear of being abandoned no longer outweighed the truth pressing inside my chest. I didn't want bowed heads of pity. I wanted to raise mine and tell everything in my own voice. Not let anyone else tell it for me, not let anyone erase it. Not let anyone dismiss it as me just being dramatic. The upcoming speech would not be a gift for my family. It would be a gift for myself. And for everyone who has lived quietly, hoping for just once to be called by name. The opening notes of the graduation ceremony echoed steadily, the traditional music stretching along with the students' steps as we filed into the hall. I walked between rows of red-carpeted seats, clutching the folded speech tucked neatly inside my gown sleeve. Each step seemed to push the hidden years further behind me. Under the golden lights, families shimmered in button-down shirts, floral dresses, corsages, except for 3 empty chairs in the front row, marked more family. No one sat there. No one asked why. I didn't look at those chairs again. My eyes found Hannah, standing at the back with Daniel and Professor Caldwell. She lifted 2 fingers in a small V, her gaze warm like a blessing without words. I nodded faintly and moved forward. The host's voice carried through the microphone, announcing each student with special honors. When it was my turn, the hall quieted. Something in his tone drew attention. This year's valedictorian Serenity Moore, an outstanding communication major, recipient of the Honor Scholarship for 3 consecutive years, and author of more than a dozen student publications that sparked conversation in the academic community. I stepped onto the stage too. Prolonged applause, but all I could hear was my heartbeat pounding in my chest. At the podium, I laid my paper on the polished wood. Hundreds of faces looked up. And in the back, the live stream camera glowed red, broadcasting every detail straight into the homes of those who once called me daughter, only to say they were too tired to fly here. I began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, professors, friends, and those watching this ceremony from afar. Today I stand here not only as a graduate, but as someone who has walked this road on my own 2 feet, with everything I had and everything I didn't. I paused, eyes drawn to the 3 empty seats. A cold gust seemed to pass through my chest. I once thought that to be loved, I had to work harder. I studied, I worked, I saved every dollar, I skipped fun, ignored relationships, all in the hope that one day they would see me. A faint buzz came from my gown pocket. I tried to ignore it, but the screen's glow flickered insistently. I pulled out the phone, glanced at the message. The words stood stark. Mom, don't make a scene. Just thank people like everyone else. I froze for a moment. Then something inside me stopped trembling, stopped fearing. I lifted the phone high, showing it to the main camera, streaming live to the giant screen on stage left. The crowd stiffened as the message appeared bold on a blue background. A murmur rippled. Some turned to each other, disbelief written on their faces. I held the microphone steady, my voice not loud but clear enough to let every word fall. This is why I chose to tell the truth today. The hall fell silent. I continued, my tone even, as if unfolding memories buried deep. I've never had someone waiting after a final exam. Never once saw anyone from my family in the audience when I spoke. I've walked through these college years with only one question. Am I good enough to deserve their presence? I drew a deep breath, and today, when they are not sitting here, but shining in a party celebrating my younger brother in Vegas, I realized that question was never right. It's not that I wasn't good enough. It's that they never saw me. Below, Hannah pulled out tissues, Daniel's hand steady on her shoulder. I caught Professor Caldwell's slight nod, his eyes glistening. I don't say this to blame. I don't want to hurt anyone, but there are truths that, if kept silent, will eat us alive from within, and I don't want to carry that wound into the next part of my life. Applause broke out, not polite claps. Applause from those who had felt invisible. Faces turned toward me now with something beyond curiosity recognition. I lowered my voice, almost a whisper to myself. To anyone here who has wondered if their efforts are in vain, do not doubt your worth just because someone else doesn't see you. Your presence is real, your achievements are real, and your feelings are real. When I finished, I pulled out the official printed speech from my gown, held it up to the camera, and slowly tore it in half. The paper fell to the podium like something no longer needed. I bowed. The applause erupted, roaring and unending. I walked off stage without looking back. I didn't need to see whether those empty seats had been filled at the last minute. I already understood. Not everyone who comes is meant to stay, and not everyone absent is truly a loss. The next morning, sunlight poured through thin curtains in my small rented room as if nothing had happened. But when I unlocked my phone, it felt like the world had shifted. Over 400 messages, more than 1,000 social media notifications. My inbox flooded. The first email from the student media office manager had a blunt subject line, "You just caused an earthquake." I scrolled quickly. A student named Alex, who had been on camera duty, had posted the full video of my speech. In less than 12 hours, it had been shared over 30,000 times. Comments stacked beneath. support, empathy, outrage. I cried when she held up the phone. No one has ever dared do that. My daughter is ignored by her family, too. Thank you, Serenity, for speaking for so many of us. Who gave her the right to expose her family like that? Where's her dignity? That morning, the local news channel played a clip of my speech on their Voices of a New Generation segment. I saw myself on screen, standing tall at the podium, gown glowing under soft light, voice steady and clear. I almost didn't recognize me. Not because the image was unfamiliar, but because, for once, it was being heard. My phone buzzed. A text from Hannah. The Metro paper just ran your story on the front page of the student edition. Headline: Valedictorian exposes family invisibility at graduation. Want me to grab you 10 copies? Before I could reply, a notification popped from Instagram. Ethan had posted a new story, a screenshot of my speech, bold red text underneath. My sister's just jealous. She's always loved playing the victim for pity. Don't be fooled. In the comments, his investor friends piled on. Some called me the bitter sister who didn't get the inheritance. Others demanded the truth behind her motives. I didn't respond. I had known Ethan would react first. In our family, his image always mattered most. I wasn't angry, just tired. Not 10 minutes later, another email appeared. From my mother, no greeting, no subject line. Just a few sentences. If you don't delete the speech, post a public apology, and claim you spoke in the heat of emotion, then you'll face life on your own. Don't call, don't text, don't come home. From now on, we have nothing to do with each other, Mom. I read it again and again, no question marks, no ellipses. Just a stark ultimatum, sent as if I were a business partner who had broken a contract. No asking why I felt the need to say it. No sign they'd watch the whole speech instead of a clip. They didn't want to understand. They only wanted to control how I existed. Daniel walked in as I shut my laptop. He sat beside me, handed me a glass of water, his voice low. I just saw Ethan's post. Are you okay? I nodded faintly. No words could capture what was rising inside me. Should I respond? I asked, eyes still on the glass. He thought for a moment. This isn't about you anymore. It's about them. They're not angry because you lied. They're angry because you dared to speak. And that stripped them of the power to redefine the truth. I looked at him, the words hitting straight to the vein. So what should I do? The question is, do you need them to keep going? I stayed silent. After a while, I gave a thin smile. I've been on my own since 14, from filling out scholarship forms to choosing colleges, from paying tuition to covering rent. I learned to patch a bike tire myself, found doctors alone when I had food poisoning in the winter. I can keep going, Daniel said nothing more. He just held my hand, not to comfort, but to affirm, you chose right. A new message buzzed from Hannah. The alumni group is buzzing. One professor wants you to guest lecture in the writing social portraits class. Interested? I typed back, I'll think about it. I set the phone down, eyes on my mother's email still open. My hands were steady, my throat no longer bitter. Only a clear sense that I had stepped through a locked door I had stood outside for years, and on the other side was where I finally saw myself most clearly. I was rearranging the bookshelf when a knock came at the door. The sound wasn't loud or hurried, but enough to make me pause in the quiet room. Through the frosted glass, a familiar outline appeared. Taller than me by half a head, a slight lean in his posture, spotless white sneakers so new they didn't bear a single scuff. I opened the door. Ethan stood there, a cup of coffee in his hand, his eyes flicking quickly past me into the room as if taking stock of the air. He didn't smile. I didn't invite him in. Are you free? His opening line sounded more like a business proposal than a conversation between siblings. I silently stepped aside, letting him in. Ethan set the cup down on the table and pulled out a chair. I sat opposite, leaving just enough distance so we could look each other in the eye without being too close. "You blew this out of proportion," he began, his voice forced into calm. "The family's under a lot of negative attention right now. Mom hasn't slept all week. Dad's on edge." I kept my gaze on him, saying nothing. Ethan couldn't stand the silence. "I'm here because they asked me, and also because I think you should ease things down. You know how the media works. They'll twist details, spin them out of context. If you make a public apology, say you got carried away, Mom and Dad will let it go." I leaned back, arms crossed, eyes steady on him. "And then what?" I asked. "We take a family photo, post it online, and everyone plays their role like those years I spent celebrating my birthday alone never happened." Ethan frowned. "You always make everything too big. Every family has a little imbalance." I stood, walked to the shelf, and pulled out a thick leather-bound notebook, edges worn. I set it in front of him. "What's this?" he asked, cautious. "A journal, 10 years, every event in our lives. Date, time, what happened, and one column. Who was there, who wasn't." Ethan chuckled, but the laugh died quickly as he opened the first page. I sat down again, watching every flicker of expression on the face of the brother who had been cradled like gold all his life. First page, in black ink, neat handwriting. 2009. State Academic Awards Ceremony, Serenity. First place. Present, homeroom teacher. Absent, Mom, Dad, Ethan. Note, Mom busy taking Ethan to regional chess tournament. Second page. 2010. Stanford University Summer Academic Camp, Serenity. Selected, present. No one absent. Whole family. Note, Dad said Stanford can't even arrange housing. Third page. 2011. Serenity's 18th birthday. Present. Classmates. Hannah absent. Family. Note, Ethan sprained his ankle playing soccer. A whole family stayed at the hospital. I didn't speak. Ethan flipped faster, his calm unraveling. He stopped at the page marked high school graduation. The note read, "Family seats, empty. Photographer, security guard." He looked up at me. His eyes had softened a little, though his voice tried to hold ground. "You wrote all this to accuse us?" I shook my head. "No, to remind myself I'm not crazy, that your absence wasn't bad memory, it really happened." He exhaled sharply, shut the journal, and tapped the cover with his fingers as if stalling. Then, slowly, "You'll never understand the pressure of being the one with all the expectations. Everything I do, they demand perfection. If I mess up, the whole family swoops in to fix it. I don't get to be weak." I tilted my head, staring into him. "But you get to fall and still be caught." I didn't. "I don't envy the expectations. I envy the presence. The way you can fail and still be defended. I could do everything right, and no one noticed." Ethan was silent. For the first time, his face lost its guard. He glanced at the journal once more, then said quietly, "Mom and Dad said, if you admit fault, they'll consider giving you a share of the estate. The house, Dad's company stock." I let out a small laugh, not sad, just struck by the absurdity of using property to bargain with pain. "Tell them," I said slowly, "I don't need land. I don't need money. I don't need a piece of the inheritance. I just need not to be erased from the truth." Ethan looked at me longer than I expected. Then he rose, adjusted his jacket, and headed for the door. At the threshold, he paused. "You won't be alone forever, will you?" The question slipped out, reflexive, free of edge. I answered without turning. "Some people aren't family by blood, but they choose to stay. And sometimes choice weighs more than blood." That evening, I returned to my small third-floor apartment. Sunset washed the windowsills gold, the wind in the curtains whispering like something reviving. I told no one about seeing Ethan. not out of fear or shame, but because some exhaustion needed to be carried quietly so my heart could breathe. When I opened the door, the scent of cinnamon rolls drifted through the air. Strings of little lights hung along the kitchen cabinets. On the dining table, an ivory tablecloth, a vase of pale yellow daisies, three small candles burning. Daniel stood at the oven, flipping a tray of pastries. Hannah lounged on the sofa, munching cookies, her eyes brightening as she saw me. "Hello, valedictorian," she grinned, her familiar smile soothing like a gentle hand on an old bruise. Daniel turned, dusting his apron. We decided not to wait for an anniversary. Tonight's reason enough to open wine. I stood at the doorway, hands still on the knob. These faces, no shared blood, no obligation, were the very people who had never left me alone before any stage. "Did you invite anyone else?" I asked softly. "Of course," Hannah said, pointing at the table. "Professor Caldwell's on his way. And I called Linda and Joseph, the neighbors from Boulder." I laughed, shaking my head. "Joseph still remembers me?" he said. "The brown-haired girl who walked the neighbor's dog at 6 a.m. How could I forget?" Daniel handed me a glass of water, his eyes following every flicker on my face. "We can't replace anyone, but we can choose to stay." I took the glass without words. The tightness in my chest wasn't pain anymore, it was the weight of finally being seen, without having to earn it. The doorbell rang. Hannah jumped up. Linda stepped in, silver hair neatly pinned, wearing a moss-green sweater, holding a tin of her homemade cookies. Joseph followed with a bottle of red wine and a harmonica tucked in his coat pocket. "Serenity," Linda called my name, like greeting a granddaughter she hadn't seen in years. "I've been following your student articles. We may not share a roof, but you've always been part of the old neighborhood." I hugged her. That embrace, steady, unconditional, unquestioning, made me want to sink down and weep. Professor Caldwell arrived minutes later, coat slung over his arm, a small envelope tied with ribbon. He pressed it into my hand as I met him at the door. "That speech," he said simply, "was something I hadn't seen in 30 years of teaching." We gathered around the table, fresh pastries, warm salad, glasses of wine poured. No one spoke of those who were missing. Their absence didn't need naming. The fullness of those present was answer enough. Hannah recalled meeting me at the library, the girl scribbling like she was copying the whole earth. Daniel laughed, adding how I turned him down for 3 months because I was too busy working extra shifts to pay tuition. Joseph pulled out his harmonica, playing a country tune that made everyone chuckle. Professor Caldwell raised his glass, his deep voice steady. "I've seen hundreds of graduates, but tonight I want to tell Serenity, you are not only brilliant, you are brave. And that cannot be taught in a classroom." I didn't lift my wine. I just looked around at the room, at the people gathered not for duty, not for appearances, but simply because they wanted to be here when I needed them. The candles cast long shadows on the walls. The story in this room wasn't about my wounds anymore, but about the stitching being done by other hands. I didn't call them replacements. They weren't replacing anyone. They were the people I chose, and the ones who chose me, without requiring proof. I was brewing tea when the delivery man knocked. A tall man in a dark uniform handed me a parcel wrapped in thick craft paper. No sender name, only a handwriting I recognized from the Christmas cards my mother used to send relatives, tilted right, a bit rushed, but unmistakably clear. I took it, closed the door, and carried it slowly to the wooden table where Daniel usually set his laptop. My hand rested on the paper's corner, hesitating, not out of fear of what was inside, but from the strange closeness, like the past had just knocked, uninvited. I peeled away the layers, one by one, until a worn leather notebook emerged, yellowing at the edges, spine carrying the scent of dry ink mixed with old paper, and something intimate, familiar. Inside was a typewritten manuscript, each page fastened with brass clips. On the first page, the title, The One Left at the End of the Row. Beneath it, handwritten in deep blue fountain pen, To Serenity. I once dreamed of writing a book, but never had the courage to finish it. Seeing you on stage that day reminded me of my own unfinished dream. I turned more pages. The writing was clear, with crossouts in pen and margin notes in smaller handwriting. The main character, a young woman named Elia, grew up in a small town, always striving to be seen among relatives who turned away. Fictional, yet reflecting something unspoken, deep within the writer, something he had never put into words. I stopped at a short passage. Elia stepped onto the stage, looking around but not seeing her mother. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry if her mother didn't show. But as she spoke, her voice still trembled, not from sadness, but because a dream abandoned by others sometimes hurts more than failure itself. I closed my eyes, my hands still, resting on the page. It wasn't the writing that made my fingers shake. It was realizing my father had once understood that feeling. He just never had the courage to face it. Beneath the manuscript was an old envelope sealed with soft wax. No name on the outside, but the handwriting was my mother's. I carefully opened it. Inside were old color photographs, edges frayed, the ink blurred in spots. One photo I had never seen before. Me, about 3 years old, sitting between two adults with jet black hair, my little arms wrapped tightly around my mother's neck, my face lit with a wide smile. I was in the center. My mother looked down at me, softer than in any photo I had seen since. My father's hand rested on my shoulder, his eyes on the camera. Ethan was nowhere in the frame. I flipped it over. In faded blue ink, it read, April 1997, Serenity's 3rd birthday, the little lake park behind the house. I had never known this photo existed. I had never been told about that birthday. I searched deeper in the envelope. More photos. Me beside a Christmas tree, hugging a giant teddy bear. Me bent over homework on the carpet, hair tied high. Me smearing frosting on my nose while baking with Mom. Each image was a slice of memory I thought was lost or never existed at all. And then the last page. A folded note, written by my mother's hand. Serenity. I once thought hiding these things was a way to start fresh after Ethan was born, but it never erased the truth that you were once the center of our lives. I was wrong to let you believe you were never loved. I sat still for a long time. No one in my family had ever told me I mattered. I had believed I wasn't worth remembering, not special enough for a photograph. Yet here they were hidden, tucked away, silent proof of something else. I had been loved, in a way they didn't know how to sustain. Daniel came home at 7 p.m. When he opened the door, I was still at the table, the sunset casting a long stripe of light across my shoulder. He saw the stack of photos, the manuscript, then looked at me. Something happened? I nodded, handing him the manuscript. Daniel flipped through a few pages, stopping at the opening passage. He read silently. When he looked back at me, his voice was low. You okay? I didn't answer right away. I clasped my hands, then whispered, I think he wanted to tell me something a long time ago. I just stopped waiting. Daniel sat beside me, picking up the photo in my hand. You don't have to wait for them to say it. You have the right to look back, to touch those memories, and decide for yourself what matters. My lips pressed together, eyes burning, but no tears fell. I wasn't obliged to forgive. I wasn't obliged to forget. But I realized I could choose to keep what was real, without letting the past tie me to the wound. I placed the manuscript back in its leather folder, set the photos carefully into a small wooden box, and closed the lid tight. Not hidden, not displayed, just kept part of a truth once lost. Not every hurt has to be erased. Sometimes seeing it again with new eyes is enough to change everything. I accepted the invitation to the Truth and Narrative conference one autumn morning. yellow leaves scattered thick across the New York sidewalks. The coordinator's email said my graduation speech had inspired many, and they wanted to hear more this time, not as a student, but as a speaker. I stared at the screen, my chest heavy. I had spoken before hundreds, but never as a representative of myself. No longer a story in the shadows, but one placed fully in the light. On the day of the conference, the large hall at the convention center was packed. White lights washed over the room, hundreds of eyes fixed on the podium. I stood backstage, breathing deep. Hannah squeezed my hand, Daniel only nodded. Their presence was enough. When my name was called, I walked out in a simple black dress, low, heels, no elaborate jewelry. I set my notes on the podium, raised my head. I didn't start reading right away. I let a few seconds of silence stretch, feeling the weight of this moment. My name is Serenity Moore. I began, my voice carrying clear through the mic. I grew up in a family where absence became normal. I thought that if I worked harder, achieved more, my parents would show up. But as I grew older, I realized presence doesn't come from results. It comes from choice. And sometimes the people we hope for most choose to turn away. I paused, eyes sweeping to the back row. Ethan sat there, shirt buttoned neat, hair combed flat. For the first time, his face held no smugness, no defiance. He sat still, hands clasped, eyes locked on me. I didn't know why he came. Maybe curiosity, maybe because of the manuscript Dad sent. But he was there, and that was enough to remind me this story was no longer only mine. I turned back to the hall. We cannot choose the family we are born into, but we can choose who walks with us through life. It took me years to understand that. And now, when I look around, I see I am not alone. I have friends, teachers, neighbors who once drove me to competitions when my parents didn't come. I have those here in this room, listening. Applause rippled, not loud, but steady, affirming. I went on. Speaking truth may brand you a traitor, may earn you names like ungrateful, but silence is more dangerous. It makes you question your worth. The most important lesson I've learned is this. Recognition can come from within. You don't have to wait for others. I told them about the 10-year journal, with its columns of empty boxes where my parents should have been, and the bittersweet relief of showing it to Ethan. I told them about the small dinner Hannah and Daniel threw, where candlelight and laughter filled the years of emptiness. I told them about my father's manuscript and my mother's hidden photos, proof I had once been the center, even if it hadn't lasted. As I ended, my voice slowed, both a close and an opening. We can forgive or not, we can keep or let go. But never let someone else's absence define your existence. The whole hall rose in applause. Lights shone bright as I glanced again to the back. Ethan didn't stand at first, but then he slowly clapped, his eyes never leaving me. No challenge, no defense, just silent acknowledgement. That night, in the new Brooklyn apartment, Hannah and Daniel set out a simple dinner. Hot pizza, salad, a cheap bottle of wine that warmed the air. The window cracked open, autumn wind carrying city horns inside. I sat between them, staring at the glass in front of me. Did you ever think you'd be sitting here, after everything? Hannah asked, her eyes glowing in the warm light. I smiled, swirling the wine. No, but maybe this is where I was meant to be. Daniel lifted his glass. To the courage it took to speak. Hannah clinked hers. To truth finding its light. I raised mine, looking at the two beside me. My voice was low, but sure. Real family is the people who choose to see you. The glasses chimed, the sound echoing through the small room, washing away the emptiness I'd carried since childhood. I knew then the road ahead would not be walked alone. As I share my story, I don't ask for pity, nor try to paint myself as a victim. I want to share a journey many of you may have lived, the feeling of being forgotten in your own home, then learning to rise and find a family of your own. What troubles me most isn't my parents' absence on important days, but the question, what do we do when those we most expect cannot be there? Do we stay silent to keep the peace, or do we speak the truth, risking everything to be ourselves? I chose to speak, and it changed my life. But what about you? If it were you, would you stay silent to preserve the picture of a perfect family? Or would you stand up and claim your worth? I want to hear your thoughts, because every answer carries a story, a wound, and maybe a piece of healing. If this story touched you, leave a comment and share your perspective. And don't forget to follow the channel for more stories about family, choices, and how we find ourselves again in life's complications. Because sometimes a story simply told is enough to remind us we are not alone.